You know those rom-coms where the clumsy girl spills coffee on the handsome billionaire and they fall in love over apologies and napkins? This isn't that. When Nora dumped a scalding dark roast onto the lap of Chicago's most feared syndicate boss, she didn't get a meet-cute. She got a death sentence, or so she thought, because Leo Castiglione didn't pull a gun. He wiped his slacks, looked her dead in the eye, and handed her a bill she could only pay with her time. The espresso machine at grind and press hissed like a dying lung. It was 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of bleak, rain-soaked Chicago afternoon that made the sky look like bruised iron. Nora wiped the steam from her forehead with the back of her wrist. Her apron smelled of sour milk and roasted beans. Her feet throbbed in her cheap sneakers. She had a sociology paper due in 12 hours, rent due in 4 days, and exactly $42 in her checking account. She didn't have the energy to care when the bell above the door chimed. Usually the afternoon rush was a blur of tailored suits and frantic paralegals barking orders for oat milk cortados. But when the door opened this time, the ambient noise in the cafe, the clatter of ceramic, the low hum of conversation, the jazz playing off Spotify, didn't just fade. It evaporated. Nora looked up from tamping espresso. 3 men had walked in. 2 of them were built like freight trains, wearing overcoats that bulged unnaturally at the ribs. They flanked the man in the middle. Leo Castiglione didn't look like a mob boss from the movies. He wasn't chewing a cigar, and he wasn't wearing a flashy pinky ring. He wore a charcoal wool suit that probably cost more than Nora's college tuition. His dark hair was neatly cut, his jaw shadowed by late-day stubble. He looked like a weary investment banker, except for his eyes. They were completely flat. Dead, assessing, and utterly devoid of warmth. The paralegals at the window tables suddenly found their laptops fascinating. A man reading the Tribune folded it and quietly slipped out the side door. 2 black coffees, one of the human freight trains grunted, stepping up to the register. He pointed a thick finger at Leo, who had taken a seat at a small corner table. And a double macchiato for him. Hot. Bring it over. Nora didn't argue. She rang it up. The man tossed a $50 bill on the counter and didn't wait for change. Her hands were steady as she pulled the shots. She wasn't an idiot. She grew up in the South Side. She knew who ran the ports, who ran the unions, and who ran the streets. The Castiglione family was a ghost story. Chicagoans told each other to explain why certain politicians resigned suddenly, or why certain warehouses burned down in the middle of winter. She poured the steamed milk over the dark espresso, set the ceramic cup on a saucer, and added the 2 black coffees to a tray. Just drop it off and go back behind the counter, she told herself. Nora walked out from behind the register. The floor was slick. Someone had tracked in rain, pooling muddy water near the condiment station. She navigated around a discarded umbrella, her eyes locked on Leo's table. He was reading an email on his phone. He looked bored. She reached the table. 2 black coffees, 1 macchiato. Leo didn't look up. He simply reached out to take the small ceramic cup from the tray. At that exact second, the heel of Nora's worn-out sneaker caught the edge of the pooling rainwater. Her ankle rolled. The tray tipped. Physics is a cruel, unforgiving thing. The 2 large black coffees slid first, hitting the edge of the table and shattering, sending a wave of 200-degree liquid directly into Leo Castiglione's lap. The macchiato followed, bouncing off his knee and splashing up his pristine white dress shirt. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. The hiss of the espresso machine in the background suddenly sounded deafening. Nora was frozen, one knee on the wet linoleum, the empty tray clattering to the floor. The 2 bodyguards moved instantly. Hands went into their coats. Leo stood up. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. The scalding coffee was soaking through his trousers, burning his skin. But his expression didn't change. He looked down at the dark, spreading stain on his charcoal slacks. Then he looked down at Nora. Nora started. Her throat was bone dry. She wasn't going to apologize. Apologies were for stepping on toes. You didn't apologize for signing your own death warrant. I slipped. One of the guards, a man with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, took a step forward, his hand fully gripping whatever was under his coat. Boss. Leo raised a single hand, just 2 fingers lifted in the air. The guard stopped dead. Leo reached onto the table, grabbed a stack of thin paper napkins, and began methodically dabbing at his shirt. The paper shredded instantly. He dropped the ruined napkins onto the table. "Get up," Leo said. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a razor. Nora stood. She felt a hysterical laugh bubbling in her chest, but swallowed it down like battery acid. She looked him in the eye. If he was going to have her dragged into an alley, she wasn't going to look at the floor. "Name," he said. "Nora." He studied her. He took in the faded apron, the bags under her eyes, the defiant jut of her chin, despite the fact that her hands were shaking. "Nora," he repeated, testing the syllables. "Do you know how much a bespoke suit from Savile Row costs, Nora?" "More than I make in a year," she said. It came out sharper than she intended. A tiny, almost imperceptible twitch happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. $5,000. The shirt is another $800. You've also given me second-degree burns on my thigh, but I'll waive the medical fees out of generosity." "Generosity?" she echoed flatly. "I'm a businessman," Leo said softly, stepping closer. He smelled of rain, expensive cedar cologne, and the bitter coffee she'd just dumped on him. "You destroyed my property. You owe me a debt. I have $42. I don't want your money." He looked at his ruined clothes again, sighing faintly. "I need a shield, a civilian, someone perfectly, remarkably ordinary." His dark eyes snapped back to hers. "You're going to pay me back in time. Every Friday night, for the foreseeable future, you are going to put on a dress, and you are going to sit across from me at a restaurant, an opera, or a charity gala." Nora blinked. "You want me to pretend to date you? To pay off a dry cleaning bill?" "Replacement bill," he corrected smoothly. "And yes, the district attorney is currently attempting to paint me as a violent, unhinged sociopath, a steady, wholesome girlfriend from the South Side who works her way through college, does wonders for a man's public image." "And if I say no?" Leo leaned in. The air between them felt thick, charged with a quiet menace. "Then I collect the $5,800. Today." Nora looked at the 2 men standing behind him, hands still resting in their coats. She looked at her wet, cheap sneakers. She thought about her sociology paper. "What time on Friday?" she asked. By Thursday, Nora had convinced herself it was a hallucination induced by stress and caffeine withdrawal. Mob bosses didn't demand fake dating arrangements. That was the stuff of cheap paperback novels left behind in the staff break room. Real criminals broke your kneecaps and tossed you into the Chicago River. But at exactly 6:45 p.m. on Friday, a sleek, armored black town car idled at the curb in front of her dilapidated apartment building. Nora stood at her 3rd-floor window, watching it. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick, reflecting the neon sign of the liquor store across the street. She wasn't wearing a gown. She didn't own a gown. She wore her best black dress, a thrifted A-line that fit decently, and a pair of low heels she usually reserved for funerals and job interviews. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Come down." She grabbed her coat. When she reached the sidewalk, the back door of the town car swung open. The driver didn't get out. He just unlocked it from the front. Nora slid into the leather interior. It smelled like new car and peppermint. Leo was sitting in the far corner. He was wearing a different suit. Midnight blue, perfectly tailored. He looked like violence wrapped in silk. He didn't look at her as she closed the door. He was tapping away on a tablet. "Nice to see you too," Nora muttered, pulling her coat tight around her. "Seatbelt," he ordered, his voice flat. She clicked the belt into place. "Where are we going?" "Dinner." He finally looked up, his eyes doing a quick, clinical sweep of her outfit. "Is that the best you have?" Nora flushed, defensive anger flaring instantly. "I owe you $5,000, not a fashion show. You wanted a wholesome working-class civilian. This is what we wear. It's called a budget." Leo held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Fair. It works." The car glided away from the curb, moving through the gritty streets of her neighborhood toward the glittering skyline of downtown. The silence in the car was heavy, oppressive. Nora wasn't good at silence. "So, what's the play here?" she asked, turning in her seat to face him. "Are we madly in love? Did we meet at a farmer's market? Do I need to gaze adoringly into your eyes while you order the hitmen around?" Leo locked his tablet and set it down. He turned his head slowly, looking at her like she was a mildly interesting bug under a microscope. "We met at your coffee shop," he said, his tone devoid of humor. "You spilled coffee on me. I was charmed by your profound lack of grace. I asked you out. You said yes. We have been dating for 2 months. 2 months? Nora scoffed. If I've been dating you for 2 months, why hasn't anyone seen us together until tonight? Because I value my privacy. But recent, legal inquiries require me to be more transparent. Right. The district attorney. Nora leaned back. You know, usually, people use PR firms to fix their image. They don't blackmail baristas. PR firms are predictable. The DA expects me to hire a firm. He doesn't expect me to date a woman who buys her clothes by the pound. Nora opened her mouth to snap back, but he cut her off. Rule number 1, Leo said, leaning forward. The space between them vanished. He was suddenly very close, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. When we are in public, you will smile. You will act relaxed. You will not flinch if a camera flashes. You will not speak to anyone about my business, my associates, or my schedule. I don't know anything about your business, she pointed out, her heart hammering against her ribs. Keep it that way. Rule number 2. If anyone asks, you like me. You think I'm misunderstood. You think I'm a legitimate logistics contractor. Logistics contractor. Got it. Rule number 3. He leaned back, the oppressive weight of his presence lifting slightly. Don't ask questions. Eat the food. Smile. Go home. How long is this going to last? She asked. Leo looked out the window at the passing city lights. Until the DA drops the RICO investigation, or until you pay off the suit, whichever comes first. Great. Can I get an itemized receipt for tonight's hours? He didn't laugh, but he didn't glare either. He just looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. You're either very brave, Nora, or very stupid. I'm broke, she replied. It makes you immune to a lot of things. Fear is a luxury. For a second, something shifted in his expression. The flat, dead look vanished, replaced by a sharp, calculating gleam. He studied her face, as if seeing her for the first time. We're here, he said softly, as the car pulled up to the valet stand of Lumière, a restaurant that required reservations a year in advance. Leo opened his door and stepped out. He walked around to her side, opening the door and offering his hand. Nora looked at his outstretched hand. It was large, the knuckles slightly scarred, a stark contrast to the perfect cuff of his shirt. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, calloused, and surprisingly warm. "Smile, Nora," he murmured as the flash of a paparazzo's camera went off from across the street. "You're having the time of your life." Lumière was the kind of restaurant that made you feel poor the second you stepped on the carpet. It was quiet, hushed like a library, but the air smelled of truffles, seared butter, and old money. The lighting was dim, casting golden shadows over the patrons. When Leo walked in, the maitre d' practically bowed. "Mr. Castiglione, your table is ready." Nora kept her chin up, acutely aware of the stares. She felt the eyes of wealthy women in designer silks raking over her thrifted dress. They were trying to figure out the math. Why was the city's most dangerous phantom walking in with a girl who looked like she'd just gotten off a shift at a diner? Leo didn't seem to notice the stares. Or if he did, he didn't care. He guided her to a secluded booth in the back, shadowed by a large, sweeping indoor ficus. He pulled her chair out. It was a perfectly gentlemanly gesture, executed with the warmth of a military drill. They sat. A waiter materialized instantly, pouring sparkling water. "I don't know what to order," Nora said, looking at a menu entirely in French with no prices listed. "What's the exchange rate on fake dating? Do I get an appetizer, or does that add another month to my sentence?" Leo picked up his menu. "Order whatever you want. It's on the company." "The logistics company?" "Exactly." Nora set the menu down. "Fine. You order for me. I don't read French, and I'm not going to pretend I do." Leo glanced at her over the top of his menu. "You don't care about looking uncultured in front of me? You threatened me into a date over spilled coffee. We are way past me trying to impress you, Leo." He gave a slight nod to the waiter, who had been hovering nervously. Leo ordered in rapid, flawless French. The waiter nodded frantically, took the menus, and vanished. "So," Nora said, folding her hands on the white tablecloth, "what do couples like us talk about? Your favorite type of cement for shoes? My sociology thesis?" "You're a sociology major," he noted. It wasn't a question. "Why?" "I want to understand why systems fail people, why communities break down, why guys like you end up running things instead of the actual government." It was a bold thing to say. She knew it. The second the words left her mouth, her stomach tightened. She was pushing her luck. Leo didn't pull a gun. He didn't even look angry. He reached for his water glass. "The government is just the biggest gang on the block, Nora. They just have better PR and a flag. Systems don't fail. They work exactly as they were designed to keep power in the hands of the people who already have it. My family just chose not to wait for permission to take our share. That's a very cynical way to justify organized crime. It's a practical way to justify survival." He looked at her. "You grew up in Canaryville. Your father was a machinist who lost his pension when the factory went bankrupt. Your mother works 2 jobs. You're 30,000 in student debt." Nora froze. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade. "You looked into me. I am trusting you with my public face," he said calmly. "I don't do blind spots. I know everything about you, Nora Campbell. That's a violation of privacy. That's due diligence." The waiter returned, setting down 2 plates of something small and artistic. Seared scallops sitting on a smear of dark sauce. Nora stared at it. She was starving. but her appetite had suddenly vanished beneath a wave of cold reality. He wasn't just a scary guy in a suit. He was a machine. He had her entire life filed away in a folder somewhere. "Eat," he commanded softly. "I'm not hungry anymore." "You haven't eaten since a stale bagel at 6 a.m. Eat the food, Nora." She looked up at him sharply. "Don't manage me." "I'm not managing you. I'm telling you that you need protein." He picked up his fork. "We have an hour left. If you sit there and pout, people will think we're fighting. Rule number 2, you like me, remember?" Nora picked up her fork. She stabbed a scallop. She took a bite. It was, annoyingly, the best thing she had ever tasted. Butter, garlic, the sea. She closed her eyes for a brief second, unable to stop a soft sigh. When she opened her eyes, Leo was watching her. Not with the cold, dead assessment from before. There was a flicker of something else. Curiosity. "Good?" he asked. "It's fine," she lied, taking another bite. Leo leaned back in his chair. "I didn't expect you to be so stubborn. I didn't expect you to know what a bagel is. I run an empire, Nora. I don't live in a cave." For the next 45 minutes, they ate. They didn't talk much. Leo answered a few brief texts on his phone, and Nora watched the room. She noticed the subtle things, the way Leo's eyes constantly tracked the exits, the way he never sat with his back to the door, the way his left hand always stayed above the table, near his water glass, while his right hand rested out of sight. He lived in a state of constant, low-level paranoia. The realization hit her strangely. He was terrifying, yes, but he was also trapped. When the dessert plates were cleared, Leo dropped a black titanium card on the table. He didn't look at the check. "Time to go," he said. They walked out the same way they came in. The maitre d' bowed again. The cold night air hit Nora's face, a relief after the heavy, perfumed air of the restaurant. The town car was waiting. As they approached, Nora noticed a man standing near the alleyway, adjacent to the restaurant. He was wearing a dark jacket, a baseball cap pulled low. He had a camera with a long lens. Leo saw him too. Without missing a beat, Leo's hand slid to the small of Nora's back. The touch was electric, hot through the thin fabric of her dress. He pulled her flush against his side. "Smile," he murmured into her hair. Nora forced a laugh, looking up at him as the camera flashed rapidly in the dark. For a second, looking into his dark eyes from inches away, the cynical, exhausted mob boss faded, and she just saw a man holding on tight to a lie. He opened the car door. "Get in." The first date was over. She only had the rest of her life to go. The dress arrived at her apartment on Thursday afternoon in a matte black box the size of a coffee table. Nora stared at it, sitting on her scuffed linoleum floor. The delivery man had required a signature, his eyes darting down the peeling hallway wallpaper as if expecting an ambush. She opened the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of dark tissue paper, was a sheath of emerald green silk. It wasn't a dress. It was a weapon. Beside it lay a small velvet case containing a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the dingy overhead light and threw prisms against the wall. A heavy cream-colored card sat on top. The Symphony Gala. 7 p.m. Do not wear the sneakers. Nora threw the card in the trash. She spent 10 minutes pacing her tiny living room, calculating the pawn value of the bracelet against the likelihood of Leo having her legs broken if she sold it. Survival won. When she climbed into the back of the armored town car that evening, she felt like an imposter wrapped in someone else's skin. The silk clung to her ribs, cool and unforgiving. She had spent an hour trying to pin her hair up before giving up and letting it fall around her shoulders. Leo was already in the car. He wore a traditional tuxedo. He looked like the devil attending a board meeting. He looked up from his phone as she slid in. His gaze hit her, stalled for a fraction of a second, and then swept methodically over the dress, the bracelet, the hair. "The fit is correct," he said. It was a statement of fact, not a compliment. "I feel like a hostage in a very expensive ransom video," Nora replied, tugging at the neckline. "Who exactly are we performing for tonight?" "Chicago's elite," Leo said, setting his phone aside as the car pulled into traffic. "Politicians, judges, real estate developers. The people who call me a parasite in the newspapers and then beg for my money at fundraiser auctions." "Are we expecting the district attorney?" Leo's eyes flicked to the window. The streetlights painted harsh, moving shadows across his jaw. "Harrison Cole will be there. He's running for mayor next year. He needs a dragon to slay to prove he's tough on crime. I am his dragon." "So I'm the maiden?" Leo looked back at her. The corner of his mouth twitched. "You're the proof that the dragon is just a misunderstood businessman who appreciates the arts. Tonight, Nora, you don't just smile. You mingle. You hold my arm. If someone asks how we met, you give them the coffee shop story, but you make it sound endearing. You spilled coffee. I was captivated. We bonded over a mutual love of jazz." "I hate jazz," she lied. "Learn to love it for the next 3 hours. The Symphony Center was a beacon of gold light and marble columns. Photographers clustered behind velvet ropes. When the driver opened the door, the noise washed over them. Shutter clicks, shouted names, the low murmur of extreme wealth." Leo offered his arm. Nora slipped her hand through the crook of his elbow. His muscles were rigid beneath the wool of his tuxedo. "Breathe," he muttered near her ear, his breath warm against her temple. They walked the gauntlet. Nora kept her face carefully neutral, a soft, practiced smile firmly in place. She felt the weight of 100 stairs. They walked into the grand lobby, a sprawling space dominated by a massive chandelier and waiters carrying trays of champagne. For the first hour, it was surprisingly tedious. Leo introduced her to men with graying hair and expensive dental work. He called her My Nora. She played the part. She smiled, she nodded. She deflected questions about her background by talking about her sociology studies at DePaul. She noticed how the men deferred to Leo. It wasn't respect. It was fear, thinly veiled by polite society's rules. Then the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Nora felt Leo's arm tighten abruptly under her hand. She followed his gaze. A man was cutting through the crowd, parting it like a ship through water. He was tall, perfectly groomed, with a politician's practiced smile that didn't reach his flat grey eyes. "District Attorney Cole," Leo said smoothly as the man approached. "Leo." Cole didn't offer his hand. He looked at Nora, his gaze sticky and invasive. "I see you've brought a shield tonight. Or is it a humanizing prop?" Nora felt a spike of hot anger. "This is Nora," Leo said, his voice entirely devoid of inflection. "My girlfriend." Cole chuckled, a dry, papery sound. "Girlfriend? Of course. Tell me, Nora, does he let you read his ledgers, or do you just overlook the bodies in the river because he buys you pretty jewelry?" Leo shifted. It was a microscopic movement, but the air around them suddenly felt pressurized, dangerous. Nora didn't wait for Leo to speak. She stepped slightly forward, closing the distance between herself and the district attorney. "Mr. Cole," Nora said, keeping her voice sweet and entirely devoid of fear. "I'm a sociology major. I study institutional corruption. So if we're going to talk about bodies in the river, maybe we should start with the low-income housing contracts your office approved last year that ended up condemning 3 apartment blocks in Canaryville. The ones where 2 kids died in a fire because the fire escapes weren't up to code? Or is that not the kind of crime you prosecute? Cole's smile vanished. The silence between the 3 of them was absolute, a heavy, suffocating vacuum amid the noise of the gala. Leo didn't move, but she felt his hand slide down her arm, his fingers wrapping firmly around her wrist. A warning. Cole stared at her, his eyes hardening. You have a sharp tongue for a barista. And you have a short memory for a public servant, Nora shot back. Careful, Leo, Cole said softly, looking back at the mob boss. Your pet is going to bite the wrong person one of these days. Enjoy the symphony. While you can. Cole turned and walked away. Nora let out a shaky breath, her adrenaline crashing instantly. Her hands were trembling. She reached for a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and took a long, unladylike gulp. Leo was staring at her. The dead, flat look was gone entirely. He looked stunned, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second to reveal the calculating, deeply intelligent man underneath. Did you just threaten the district attorney of Chicago in the middle of a gala? Leo asked. His voice was a low rasp. He called me a prop, Nora said, gripping the stem of her glass. And he's a hypocrite. He took kickbacks from developers. Everyone on the South Side knows it. He just buried the paperwork. Leo didn't scold her. He didn't tell her she had broken the rules. He just reached out, took the half-empty champagne glass from her trembling hand, and set it on a nearby table. Come with me, he said. He didn't take her home. The town car bypassed her neighborhood entirely, gliding toward the affluent, hyper-modern high-rises bordering Lake Michigan. Nora didn't ask questions. The adrenaline from the encounter with Cole was fading, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. The car descended into an underground garage. A private elevator took them directly up to the top floor. When the doors opened, Nora stepped into Leo's penthouse. It was exactly what she expected, and exactly what she feared. It was massive, walled with floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking the dark expanse of the lake. The floors were dark hardwood. The furniture was minimal, angular, and expensive. It looked like a luxury hotel suite. It didn't look like anyone lived there. There were no books, no photographs, no clutter. You can take your shoes off, Leo said, unbuttoning his tuxedo jacket and tossing it over the back of a stark white leather sofa. He walked toward a sleek, brutalist kitchen island. Do you drink whiskey? I drink cheap beer and tap water, Nora said, slipping off her heels. The hardwood was cold beneath her feet. Whiskey is fine. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He walked back to the living room and handed her one. He didn't sit. He stood by the glass wall, looking out at the city lights. Nora took a sip. It burned going down, spreading a heavy warmth in her chest. She sank into the edge of the sofa. Why did you bring me here? She asked. The silence in the apartment was ringing in her ears. Leo took a slow drink of his whiskey. He didn't turn around. Because Cole is an animal, a smart, desperate animal. He's going to run a background check on you by morning. He's going to look for leverage. I don't have any leverage. I don't have anything. Everyone has something, Leo said. He turned to face her. The harsh, overhead track lighting caught the exhaustion lining his eyes. The pristine mob boss image was fracturing, just a little. He looked tired, deeply, fundamentally tired. Your mother, your father's medical bills, your student loans. He will find a pressure point, and he will press it to see if you crack. Nora's grip on the glass tightened. Can he do that? He can do whatever he wants. He has a badge. Leo set his glass down on a glass coffee table. He walked over and sat on the opposite end of the sofa. The physical distance between them felt deliberate. a boundary line. I didn't ask for this, Nora said quietly. The reality of the situation was settling over her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I just spilled a cup of coffee. I know. Then let me go. You got your photo up. Cole saw us. Let me go back to my life. Leo looked at his hands. If I cut you loose now, Cole will know it was a setup. He'll haul you into an interrogation room and threaten you with obstruction until you testify that I hired you to deceive his office. I won't talk. Yes, you will, Leo said flatly. You're brave, Nora, but you aren't built for a concrete room. They will break you in 2 hours, and then they will come for me. He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. I can't let you go. You're in it now. Nora stared at him. You trapped me. Yes. The honesty was worse than a lie. He wasn't apologizing. He was just stating the grim physics of his world. How do you live like this? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Looking over your shoulder, trusting nobody, living in a museum. She gestured to the sterile apartment. Leo leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I didn't choose this life, Nora. My father built the syndicate. When he had his stroke 5 years ago, my older brother was supposed to take over. But my brother was careless. He started a war with the Russian factions. He got himself killed. The family needed a manager. Someone who didn't lead with his temper. Someone who treated the blood like a balance sheet. So you stepped in. I stepped in to stop the city from burning down, and now I manage the fire. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. I know what you think of me. You think I'm a parasite, a monster. I think you're a man who has convinced himself that he has no choices, Nora said evenly. A heavy silence stretched between them. Leo didn't argue. He just watched her, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw, the messy hair framing her face. The dress is yours, he said quietly. Keep the bracelet, too. If things go wrong, sell it. It'll cover your tuition. Nora looked down at her lap. She felt a strange, terrifying ache in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was pity. The ruthless Leo Castiglione, the Phantom of Chicago, was just a man trapped in a golden cage, handing out diamonds because he didn't know how to hand out trust. I'll see you on Friday, she said. Tuesday morning smelled like burnt toast and stale espresso. Nora wiped down the counter at Grind and Press, her mind running on a loop of the past weekend. The gala, the DA, the quiet, heavy silence of Leo's penthouse. Her normal life felt thin and papery now, like a movie set she could poke her finger through. The bell above the door chimed. The cafe was empty. It was the mid-morning lull. Nora didn't look up immediately, throwing the damp rag into the bus tub. Be right with you. Take your time, sweetheart. The voice wasn't irregular. It was thick, raspy, carrying a heavy Bronx accent that didn't belong in Chicago. Nora looked up. A man was leaning against the pastry case. He wore a cheap leather jacket over a faded t-shirt. He had a thick neck, a flattened nose that had been broken more than once, and a crude tattoo of a spiderweb creeping out from under his collar. He wasn't one of Leo's men. Leo's men wore bespoke suits and carried themselves with quiet, lethal discipline. This man looked like a blunt instrument. Can I get you something? Nora asked, keeping her voice steady. The man smiled. His teeth were stained. Just a coffee. Black, like the boss likes it. Nora's blood turned to ice water. She stood frozen behind the register. You're the girl, right? The man tapped thick fingers against the glass of the pastry case. Leo's little charity project, the one making the papers. I don't know what you're talking about, Nora said. She reached under the counter, her hand hovering inches from the silent alarm button. "Sure you don't," he chuckled, stepping away from the case and moving to the side of the counter, leaning in close. He smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap mints. "Name's Russo. I work for a competitor out of the South Side ports. Your boyfriend has been stepping on our shipping lanes. He's been ignoring our calls." "I make coffee," Nora said, her voice dropping. "I don't know anything about shipping lanes." Russo reached out with blinding speed and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like a vice, pinning her hand against the cold steel of the espresso machine. Nora gasped, trying to yank her arm back, but he was immovable. "Tell Castiglione he needs to answer his phone," Russo whispered, his breath hot against her face. "Tell him that dragging civilians into a turf war is bad for business. Tell him we know where you work. We know where your mother works. Accidents happen every day, sweetheart." He squeezed her wrist harder. Bone ground against bone. Nora gritted her teeth, refusing to scream. She stared directly into his eyes, matching his aggression with sheer, panicked defiance. Russo smiled, a slow, ugly thing. He let go of her wrist, stepping back. "Have a nice shift," he said. He turned and walked out of the cafe, the bell chiming cheerfully behind him. Nora collapsed against the counter, clutching her wrist. It was already turning a mottled purple. She was shaking so hard she could barely breathe. The illusion of safety was gone. The fake dating, the fancy dinners, the witty banter. It was all a paper shield. The real monsters were at the door. She didn't call the police. She knew better. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket and dialed the number she had sworn she would only use for scheduling dates. It rang once. "Nora," Leo answered. His voice was clipped, businesslike. "A man named Russo was just here," Nora said. Her voice cracked. She hated it. She hated how weak she sounded. Total silence on the line. The ambient background noise of a busy street on Leo's end vanished, as if he had stepped into a soundproof vault. "Are you hurt?" The question was quiet, terrifyingly quiet. "He grabbed my wrist. He said to tell you to answer your phone about the shipping lanes. He threatened my mother." "Stay exactly where you are," Leo said. "Do not go into the alley. Do not lock the front door. Lock yourself in the manager's office. I am 10 minutes away." The line went dead. Nora did what she was told. She flipped the sign to closed, locked the door to the small back office, and sat on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest, watching the doorknob. 8 minutes later, she heard the heavy thud of the cafe's back door being kicked open. "Nora!" It was Leo. She unlocked the office door and pushed it open. Leo was standing in the hallway, flanked by 2 of his massive bodyguards. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket. His tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, revealing heavy scarring along his forearms. He looked entirely different. The polished veneer was stripped away. This was the wolf. He stepped into the small office, crowding the space. He didn't ask if she was okay. He reached down and took her hand, his fingers gently pushing up the sleeve of her sweater. He stared at the dark, blooming bruises in the shape of fingers wrapping around her pale skin. A muscle feathered in his jaw. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "Russo," Leo said softly, almost to himself. "The Moretti family." "He said accidents happen," Nora whispered. Leo let go of her wrist. He turned to one of his men. "Find Russo. Put him in a car. Take him to the warehouse. Call Moretti and tell him his shipping lanes just got closed permanently." "Yes, boss," the man grunted, turning instantly and jogging out the back door. Leo turned back to Nora. The cold fury in his eyes softened, just a fraction, as he looked at her pale face. "Grab your coat," he ordered. "I have a shift." "Your shift is over. Your job here is over." He stepped closer, crowding her against the cheap metal desk. "They touched you to send me a message. That means you aren't a prop anymore, Nora. You're a target." "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice shaking. Leo reached out. His large hand hovered for a second before cupping her jaw. His thumb brushed lightly against her cheekbone. It was the most gentle, human touch she had ever felt from him. "Now," Leo said, his voice a low, gravelly promise. "I protect what is mine." Packing up a life takes embarrassingly little time when you don't own anything of value. Nora shoved her textbooks, her laptop, and 3 weeks' worth of clothes into 2 duffel bags. Dominic, a bodyguard built like a bank vault, stood by the door of her apartment. He didn't judge the peeling paint. He didn't comment on the leaky radiator clanking in the corner. He just carried the bags down to the idling SUV with silent, professional efficiency. By sunset, Nora was back in Leo's penthouse. It didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a fishbowl suspended 1,000 feet above the concrete. "Your mother is secure," Leo said. He was standing by the kitchen island, loosening his tie. He hadn't changed out of his suit yet. The harsh track lighting cast long shadows beneath his cheekbones, highlighting the exhaustion carved into his face. Nora paused halfway across the living room. "What do you mean, secure?" She was transferred to a different hospital branch in the suburbs this afternoon, a private facility. Better pay, gated parking, 24-hour security. I bought out the remainder of her mortgage in Canaryville. She thinks it was a bank error in her favor. She's safe. Nora stared at him. The sheer scale of his power, the casual way he could rewrite reality with a few phone calls, was paralyzing. She felt a sudden, sharp sting behind her eyes. It wasn't gratitude. It was the overwhelming realization of her own helplessness. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice tight. "Yes, I did." Leo poured a glass of water and drank it in one long swallow. Russo threatened her. The Moretti family operates on leverage. I removed their leverage. And what about my leverage? The debt? Leo set the glass down. The clink of crystal against granite echoed in the vast, empty room. He looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "The parameters of our arrangement have changed. You aren't paying off a suit anymore, Nora. You're staying alive." "I don't like being managed, Leo." "I don't care what you like." The words were harsh, but his tone lacked its usual cold authority. He sounded frayed. "You are going to sleep in the guest suite. You are going to take your classes online. If you need anything, Dominic will get it. You do not leave this building without me. Understood? Are we prisoners now?" "We are at war," he corrected quietly. For the next 4 days, they lived like ghosts, haunting the same museum. Nora studied at the dining table, the glow of her laptop screen the only warmth in the sterile room. Leo worked in his office. He took calls in Italian, his voice low, sharp, and increasingly violent. Men in dark coats came and went at all hours, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. The fake dating charade was dead. There were no cameras here, no galas, no PR stunts for the district attorney. Strip away the bespoke suits and the flashing bulbs, and all that was left was a man trying to hold a crumbling empire together with his bare hands. On Thursday night, the rain returned, violently lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Nora was in the kitchen, brewing a pot of cheap drip coffee she had asked Dominic to buy. The hyper-expensive espresso machine in Leo's kitchen intimidated her. She liked the bitter, burnt smell of the cheap stuff. It smelled like home. Leo walked in. He had stripped off his jacket and dress shirt, wearing only a plain white undershirt and suit trousers. The scars Nora had glimpsed at the cafe were fully visible now. A jagged line across his left shoulder, a puckered starburst of tissue near his ribs, gunshot wounds, knives, the physical ledger of his life. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the island, pulled out a stool, and sat heavily. He rubbed his face with both hands, letting out a breath that sounded like a dying engine. Nora poured a second mug of coffee. She slid it across the granite counter toward him. He lowered his hands and stared at the dark liquid. He picked it up and took a sip. He didn't grimace at the cheap, acidic taste. "Moretti hit 2 of our warehouses on the south side an hour ago," Leo said. The admission was startling. He never talked to her about the business. 3 of my men are in the morgue. Nora stopped wiping the counter. She looked at him. The mob boss armor was completely gone. He was just a man drowning in a sea of blood. "I'm sorry," she said. It felt inadequate, but it was all she had. "Don't be." Leo kept his eyes on the mug. They knew the risks when they took the oath. This is the life. Do you ever think about walking away? He looked up at her, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "Walk away to where, Nora? To a cabin in the woods? Men like me don't get to retire. We either die in a suit or we die in a cell. The best I can hope for is to keep the collateral damage to a minimum. Like me, like you." Leo's gaze dropped to her wrist. The bruising from Russo's grip had faded to a sickly yellow, but it was still visible. He reached out across the island. His fingers gently traced the edge of the bruise. His touch was feather-light, completely at odds with the violence of his world. "I shouldn't have brought you into this," he whispered. "It was arrogant. I thought I could control the board. I didn't anticipate the DA squeezing Moretti, and Moretti squeezing me back." Nora didn't pull her hand away. The cold, cynical barrier she kept between them was cracking. She realized, with a terrifying jolt of clarity, that she didn't hate him anymore. She hated his world, but she didn't hate the man sitting in front of her. "I spilled the coffee," Nora said softly. "I started it." "No." Leo looked directly into her eyes. The intensity in his stare was suffocating. "I saw you 3 weeks before that, at the cafe. I watched you argue with a guy who cut the line, and I watched you give a free pastry to a homeless kid shivering by the door. I chose you, Nora. The coffee just gave me the excuse." The breath caught in her throat. Before she could process the confession, the private elevator at the end of the hall chimed. Leo's demeanor changed in a fraction of a millisecond. The vulnerability vanished. His spine snapped straight, his hand dropping to the holster strapped to the underside of the kitchen counter. The elevator doors slid open. Dominic stepped out, his suit torn, blood smudged across his jaw. "Boss," Dominic gasped. "Moretti isn't hitting the warehouses anymore. He's coming for the head." "Get your shoes," Leo ordered. He was already moving, tossing a bulletproof vest at Dominic before throwing open a hidden panel in the hallway wall. He pulled out 2 matte black handguns and a tactical shotgun. Nora didn't ask questions. The cynical Southside girl in her knew exactly what was happening. When the sharks smell blood, they don't stop swimming until there's nothing left but bone. She ran to the guest suite, shoved her feet into her sneakers, and grabbed her heavy coat. When she returned to the living room, Leo was racking the slide of a handgun. He shoved it into his waistband and grabbed his suit jacket. "They bypassed the lobby security," Dominic said, checking his magazine. 2 teams coming up the stairs. The elevator is locked down, but they have breaching charges. We have maybe 3 minutes. "The roof," Leo said. "The chopper is on standby." He grabbed Nora's hand. His grip was tight, desperate. "Do exactly what I say. Do not hesitate. Do not freeze." "I won't," she promised. Her voice was remarkably steady. Fear had bypassed her nervous system entirely, replaced by cold, hard adrenaline. They ran, out the back door of the penthouse, up a narrow concrete service stairwell. The air was freezing. The echo of their footsteps was deafening. 2 floors down, Nora heard the muffled, concussive thud of a breaching charge blowing the penthouse door off its hinges. They hit the roof. The wind coming off Lake Michigan hit them like a physical blow, howling over the gravel. The rain was sleet now, biting into Nora's face. 50 yards away, a sleek black helicopter sat on the helipad, its rotors slowly beginning to spin up. "Move!" Leo shouted over the wind. They sprinted across the open roof. 30 yards. 20 yards. The metal door to the main stairwell burst open. "Down!" Leo roared, shoving Nora violently to the gravel. The night ripped open. The deafening crack of automatic gunfire echoed over the wind. Concrete chips exploded from the low retaining wall, inches from Nora's head. She covered her ears, pressing her face into the wet gravel, tasting dirt and copper. Leo was a machine. He dropped to one knee, ignoring the bullets snapping the air around him, and returned fire. 2 quick, rhythmic shots. A man by the stairwell crumpled. Dominic was laying down, suppressing fire with the shotgun, retreating toward the chopper. "Crawl!" Leo ordered Nora, grabbing the collar of her coat and dragging her forward. They scrambled toward the helicopter. The deafening roar of the rotors was drowning out the gunfire. A bullet sparked off the metal skid of the chopper. Leo threw Nora into the back seat. She scrambled across the leather, pressing herself flat against the floorboards. "Go!" Leo shouted to the pilot, jumping in and dragging Dominic up behind him. The helicopter banked hard, lifting off the pad just as the remaining gunmen breached the roof. Bullets peppered the armored underbelly of the chopper, pinging like deadly hail. As they ascended into the stormy sky, the city dropping away beneath them, the chaotic noise faded into the steady mechanical thrum of the engine. Nora sat up slowly. Her hands were shaking violently now. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving a cold, sick horror in its wake. She looked at Leo. He was leaning against the cabin wall, his eyes closed. His breathing was shallow. Nora's eyes dropped. A dark, spreading stain was pooling on the left side of his suit jacket, right below the ribs. "Leo." Her voice was a strangled whisper. He opened his eyes. He looked down at the blood. He didn't look panicked. He looked annoyed. "Through and through," he muttered, pressing his hand against the wound. "Hit a vest seam." "We need a hospital," Nora said, panicking, looking at Dominic. "No hospitals," Dominic grunted, wrapping a makeshift tourniquet around his own bleeding arm. "Moretti will have spotters at every ER. We have a safe house in Rockford. Medical supplies are there." The flight took 40 minutes. It felt like 4 lifetimes. Nora knelt on the floorboards, pressing her hands over Leo's to apply pressure to the wound. The blood was hot, sticky, seeping between her fingers. "Keep your eyes open," she ordered, her voice cracking. "Rule number 4, Leo. You don't get to die on my watch." A faint, blood-stained smile touched his lips. "Ordering me around, Nora?" "Someone has to. You're bleeding on my thrifted coat." The chopper landed in an abandoned airfield an hour outside the city. A waiting SUV rushed them to a sprawling, heavily fortified farmhouse hidden in the woods. For the next 2 hours, it was a blur of iodine, gauze, and agony. Leo's private doctor, a man who asked no questions and drank heavily from a flask, dug the remaining bullet fragments out of Leo's side on a stainless steel kitchen table. Nora didn't leave the room. She held Leo's good hand. He crushed her fingers when the pain spiked, but he never screamed. When it was over, and the doctor had stitched him up and pumped him full of antibiotics and morphine, Leo was moved to a bedroom on the 2nd floor. Nora sat in a hard wooden chair beside the bed. The storm raged outside, rattling the window panes. Leo was awake. The morphine made his eyes heavy, stripping away the last remnants of the ruthless syndicate boss. "You didn't run," he murmured, his voice slurred. "On the roof. You didn't freeze." "I grew up in Canaryville," Nora said quietly, wiping a damp washcloth across his forehead. "You learn how to hit the deck when the fireworks sound wrong." Leo turned his head, looking at her in the dim light. "I'm going to end this tomorrow. Moretti. The war. I'm going to burn his house to the ground." "I know." "And then you go back to your life." Nora's hand paused on his forehead. "What?" "The DA." Leo swallowed hard. "Harrison Cole. I have his ledgers, the kickbacks, the bribes, the Canaryville fire reports. I secured them yesterday. I'm sending them to the feds tomorrow morning. Cole will be indicted by noon. The investigation into me will die with his career." Nora stared at him. "You had the leverage the whole time." "I was waiting for the right moment to play the card." "The debt is paid, Nora. You survived the gala. You survived tonight. Tomorrow, you are free." He closed his eyes, the drugs finally pulling him under. Nora sat in the quiet room, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. She looked down at her hands, still faintly stained with his blood. He was setting her free. It was exactly what she had demanded from day one. So why did it feel like a cage door slamming shut? The fall of Harrison Cole was swift, brutal, and entirely public. 3 days after the shootout on the roof, Nora sat in the back booth of Grind and Press, watching a muted television screen mounted on the wall. The breaking news banner flashed red. "District Attorney indicted on federal corruption charges." The footage showed Cole, looking disheveled and pale, being escorted into a black SUV by FBI agents. The underworld war ended with a whisper, not a bang. Moretti's top lieutenants, realizing Leo had survived the hit and was now entirely off the leash, turned on their boss to save themselves. Moretti vanished. The shipping lanes returned to normal. The city took a collective, shuddering breath and went back to ignoring the monsters in the shadows. Nora took a sip of her black coffee. It tasted like ash. She had gone back to her apartment. Leo had arranged the transport. He hadn't said goodbye. He was busy managing the fallout, solidifying his territory. He had sent Dominic to drop her off with a heavy envelope containing $20,000 in cash. "Hazard pay," Dominic had grunted. Nora hadn't touched the money. It sat on her rickety kitchen table, a mocking reminder of her price tag. The bell above the cafe door chimed. Nora didn't look up. She was reviewing her sociology notes, trying desperately to force her brain back into the mundane reality of college life. Footsteps approached her booth. They didn't pass by. They stopped. Nora looked up. Leo was standing there. He wasn't wearing a bespoke suit. He wore dark jeans, a black sweater, and a leather jacket. He moved a little stiffly, favoring his left side where the stitches pulled. But he looked alive. The crushing, dead exhaustion in his eyes was gone. The cafe patrons didn't flee this time. Without his bodyguards, without the tailored armor of his power, he just looked like a startlingly handsome man grabbing a midday coffee. "Is this seat taken?" Leo asked. Nora stared at him. Her heart executed a violent, erratic rhythm against her ribs. "I thought you were busy running the city." "The city runs itself," Leo said, sliding into the booth opposite her. "I just take the toll." He looked at her notes, then at the empty mug in front of her. "I came to collect the rest of the debt." Nora's jaw tightened. "The debt is paid. You said so yourself. Cole is gone. The fake dating is over." "The fake dating is over," Leo agreed smoothly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table. Nora picked it up. It was the original dry cleaning receipt for the Savile Row suit. $5,800. Across the bottom, written in sharp, bold ink, were the words, "Paid in full." "Then why are you here?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Leo leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He didn't look at the room. He didn't track the exits. He looked only at her. "Because I lied," he said. "When I brought you to that first dinner, I told you I needed a shield. I needed someone ordinary. But I didn't want a shield, Nora. I wanted an anchor. I wanted someone who wasn't afraid to look at me and tell me I was full of shit. Someone who wouldn't flinch. You didn't flinch." "I was terrified," she admitted, "but you stayed. You held my hand while I bled. You commanded me not to die." A genuine, entirely unguarded smile broke across his face, transforming him completely. "I owe you my life, and since I am a businessman, I prefer to settle my accounts." "I don't want your money, Leo." "Good, because I'm not offering money." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His calluses scraped gently against her knuckles. "I demanded a lifetime of dates as repayment for a ruined suit. The suit is paid for. So now, I am formally asking for one real date. No cameras, no bodyguards, no PR strategy. Just you and me." Nora looked down at their joined hands. The cynical voice in her head screamed at her to run. He was a criminal. He was danger incarnate. Her life would never be simple, never be safe. But as she looked up into his dark eyes, she realized safety was an illusion anyway. The world was cold and corrupt, whether you hid from it or not. She would rather face the fire with the wolf standing by her side. "I'm a college student on a budget," Nora said, her lips curving into a slow, defiant smile. "I don't eat at places with French menus. I eat pizza, the greasy kind." Leo's thumb brushed the back of her hand. "I know a place. And if you ever try to manage my life again, or secretly pay off my mother's mortgage behind my back, I will dump a pot of scalding drip coffee on your head. On purpose." Leo laughed. It was a rich, deep sound that turned the heads of the people at the counter. "Understood," he said softly. Nora flipped her notebook shut. She stood up, pulling her thrifted coat over her shoulders. She didn't have a $5,000 dress. She didn't have a diamond bracelet. But as Leo Castiglione stood up, placed his hand on the small of her back, and guided her out of the cafe and into the bustling Chicago streets, she knew one thing for certain. She owned him. Did you enjoy this dark, grounded journey into the Chicago underworld? Nora and Leo's story proves that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do isn't spilling coffee on a mob boss. It's stealing his heart. If this cynical, high-stakes romance kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share it with your fellow romance addicts. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next full-length audio drama. Drop a comment below. What would you do if you owed a debt to Leo Castiglione? See you next time.